Last weekend, I was a presenter at the 13th Annual Terroir Creative Writing Festival in Yamhill County, Oregon. This was my first time attending the festival. There were probably 40 or so people in my session, and a few folks were kind enough to mention how useful the workshop was, and some even requested the slides afterwards. So given that response, I thought I'd share the presentation here as well, hoping other writers find it useful. Let's jump in. This is what I'm calling the tension blueprint. It's the secret to unputdownable storytelling. There are 6 sections of this presentation that we're going to walk through: stakes, information control, internal conflict, there's a bomb on the bus, well-timed reveals, and final tips to turn up the tension. So a little bit about me. I'm a writer, author, content marketer. I used to work at a small bookstore where I would host authors in events talking about their books. I've had my own book events around town. And yeah, basically I just like to talk about books and storytelling all day long. We're going to start off talking about stakes, and that is because there's no tension without stakes. Stakes help to define the boundaries of a structure. So just like in the image example here, when you're building a structure, you have stakes with lines drawn across to kind of give you the shape of the structure that you're going to be building. In the same way with storytelling, we have stakes to kind of give us a sense of the space that our story is going to occupy. Stakes give tension something to pull on because they are tied to goals. Now, when your characters have goals, then there's something that they're aiming for, something they're after, and this is going to be true of both protagonists and antagonists. This is what that looks like. So what's at stake if a character fails to reach their goals? So in each of these scenarios, which are both books and movies, what's at stake if Frodo doesn't destroy the ring? What's at stake if Katniss doesn't win the Hunger Games? And what's at stake if Paul Sheldon can't escape from Annie Wilkes? For each of these characters, we understand what their goals are, what they don't want to have happen, and then suddenly they're in a situation in which the very thing that they're so focused on, the very thing that's so precious to them, is in a precarious spot. The stakes are directly tied to the goals. But on its own, that's not going to be enough of a story, just a character wants something. We have to understand that not reaching that goal, not getting what they want, is going to be a bad thing in some kind of way. And then the why, the answer of why that is that's what's at stake for them. And so then when you have an antagonist, or the forces of nature, or conflict, or whatever it is that's standing in your protagonist's way, that's what builds tension. So for an example of a sports story, both teams are going to have the same goal. They both have the goal of winning, and so it's not enough just to have the goal. We care about who wins because we understand and care about the stakes for one team in particular that we're following along. For one team, we may be learning all about the coach and the different players on the team and why winning or losing would impact them in a specific way. And then we're set up, when it's the big game, we know that we want our team to win because there's specific reasons for that, not just to win the game, because there's stakes tied to them winning or losing. So with that in mind, take a couple of minutes to just think about what's at stake for your characters. This could be characters you've already written about or new characters that you're just trying to feel out what their story is. What's at stake for them, and what would it mean for them to fail to reach their goals? Okay, information control. This is a super fun way to play with tension. Tom Clancy said, "Suspense is achieved by information control. What you know, what the reader knows, and what the characters know." If you treat information like light discipline on naval vessels, it's a really interesting way of thinking about the sort of container of information and how it moves throughout your story. So light discipline on naval vessels at night, during wartime in particular, ships had to be very careful of the light that's emitting from their ship, because it could be seen from hundreds of miles away across the ocean by an enemy vessel. So they had to be very careful with containing their light, moving from one room to another. There's all these different ways that they're thinking about keeping the light contained. So if you think of that in terms of information in your story, secrets or clues or just other information that exists in the world of your story, you want to keep it contained in a very structured way. And there's 2 ways to do this that we're going to look into. One is using point of view to your advantage, and then the other one is to be selective about what the reader knows. So using point of view to your advantage, we're going to look at 3 points of view. Of course, there's also second person point of view and probably some others that I'm not going to cover here, but these are the ones that we're going to look at right now. So first person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. So for first person point of view, this is the point of view that we all live our lives. When you're reading a story from a first person point of view, you have intimate knowledge of the main character. The reader is going to be limited to one kind of experience, but the reader can still be kept in the dark about some information. When a story is told in past tense, the narrator can tease out information for the reader, such as, if I knew what would happen, maybe I never would have walked through the door. So that's sort of teasing for the audience that the narrator lived through some sort of life experience, and we know that whatever they're going to do next is going to kind of jumpstart some of this. They know what happened, but we don't, and we're going to follow along for the ride as they tell us. The other thing to keep in mind with first-person point of view is that, just like with real people, your first-person POV character is going to have some blind spots. You know, a character could say, I made sure to cover my tracks carefully, there's no way he could have seen me. Later it turns out that nope, he totally saw you. You thought you covered your tracks carefully, but in the end you were wrong. So just because you're in first person doesn't mean that the character is going to be right about everything. With a third person limited point of view, that can be a situation which the reader is sort of head hopping, which can be used incorrectly for sure. Head hopping can have a bad reputation if it's not used intentionally. Suddenly the reader is over in this person's point of view, where a second ago they were in this person's point of view, and there's no real rhyme or reason for that. It can be very disorienting unless it's done on purpose, in which case that's great too. But in any case, third-person limited point of view, you can still be selective with the information that you're sharing with the reader. So each point of view that you're telling a story from in any given moment is going to have different information. The reader is going to have access to more internal dialogue from more characters than they would have with first person, obviously. It can be a little bit more difficult, but this is my personal favorite. This is how I like to write stories very often. Each character's goals, strengths, and weaknesses is going to shape their point of view. So for an example here, an art thief is going to walk through a museum very differently than a couple on a date. And those two different points of view can be occupying the same space at the same time even, but they're having very different experiences of the same environment. You can experiment with switching points of view between scenes, so you could write the same scene from a different point of view just to kind of give the reader a different experience. So in the previous example, maybe we are with the couple on their date as they're going through the art museum, and then in the next scene we are in the same art museum, but we're following around the art thief who happens to be scoping out the joint because he's going to rob the place later. And then third person omniscient, this is sort of the God view. This is where the reader or the narrator sort of has a unilateral vision of all the goings on, all the people, kind of all the inner workings of the world at large. You can still be selective with information though. The reader can be kept in the dark about some things just because the narrator has optics on everything that's happening. It doesn't mean that all of that has to be shared with the reader. You can also flip that on its head and have the experience where the reader knows more than the characters do because the reader has more information than any individual character does. The reader gets a bird's eye view of the story, which means seeing many different things, but it can also mean being a little bit distant from some things. You're given more freedom with time and place in a given scene. So for an example of that, while a man is across town buying groceries, the woman he trusted most was already unlocking his apartment door. And so in that introduction to a scene there, we're neither with the man or the woman, we're not with some other character, we're just in this sort of omniscient, all-knowing sort of persona who happens to know that both of these things are happening at the same time. These are some tips for multiple point of view storytelling that I got from April Henry. She has an amazing presence on social media. Definitely check her out if you're interested in writing tips. She has great tips all the time. She brought up some really great tips for how to choose which point of view to tell a scene from. She says the character who knows the least, the character who has the most to lose, and the character who has the most unique perspective on things. And then the second point that we were going to cover is being selective about what the reader knows. So that's, again, controlling the light in the information, controlling what information is leaked, how, when, and by whom. That's going to be information that's shared both with the reader and with other characters. You want to be mindful of what happens off page or off stage. What are the characters doing when we're not watching them? When we're here watching these characters have a scene or have an interaction, what are the other characters doing that the reader's not going to know about because they were being distracted by this other thing while something else was happening? You can also play with scene order to manipulate the reader's experience. So deciding what information you're going to share when is going to be, a matter of which scene you're putting before another scene. The reader doesn't have to know everything in chronological order. They could learn something later that happened at the beginning of the book or prior to the the beginning of the story. It's only when they have some sort of reveal that's when some information comes out. And the other thing is that not everyone has to tell the truth. The reader can be misinformed because we trusted some character was telling us the truth when they weren't. Internal conflict. Tension from internal conflict is going to add a lot more depth and richness to your characters and your storytelling. So a character's drive, motivation, and unspoken needs can create inner tension when the world wants something different from them. That can be especially true when there are clear stakes on both sides and the right choice isn't clear. For an example, here is Frodo's external conflict and his internal conflict. What's happening in the world around him is he's on this long journey. There's enemies at every turn. There's this physical struggle to reach his destination and to complete his task that he's set out to do. And if that was a story just by itself, that might be mildly interesting, but it's made much more rich by the addition of Frodo's internal conflict. So the ring's powers are so strong that he's struggling to resist them. The corrupting influence of the ring is getting stronger throughout the story, throughout the journey. The physical difficulty of the journey is becoming just unbearable. He's tired, he's hungry, he's worn out, he's in grief, and he's tasted the power of the ring, and he wants more. And so those two things in conjunction with each other are kind of fighting for dominance. You know, on one hand, he wants to, for the external conflict, he just needs to get rid of this ring and move on. But internally, his conflicting inner needs and wants is acting like another antagonist that he's meeting on his journey. So internal conflict can lead to a bunch of different things for characters. So characters can be unpredictable. We're not going to be sure what they're going to do any given moment. That uncertainty is going to create this suspense for us because we can't rely that we're going to trust they're going to make the right choice. Stakes are going to be escalating as the risks are getting worse over time. The internal conflict and the external problems that they're dealing with are just increasing over time. And then, you know, their personal dilemma that they're dealing with is can start to implicate the people around them too. The people, their friends and family, people who are on this journey with them, or just happen to be around them while this is happening. Characters are going to be hesitating. They're going to hesitate to act in the moment they need to because their internal conflict is saying, no, but you should do this. It's that angel and devil on their shoulder that's whispering what to do. And that's a realistic character flaw, is being faced with a decision. You need to decide right now, but you're hesitating because there's this internal conflict. And the emotional volatility that comes with that. Characters battling themselves are going to just be more emotionally unstable. The readers are going to be just uneasy that they're going to take the wrong turn at any given moment, and we can't fully trust the characters. This is one of my favorite tips for creating tension over the span of a few different chapters or scenes, and that is that you can build tension and scene interest by not letting a character answer a big question or accept or reject an offer in the same scene that it's being asked. Because tension is going to be built when we're not sure what they're going to decide to do. So if you have a character being given an opportunity in one scene, rather than letting them say yes or no right away, we can let them kind of chew on it for a little bit, hem and haw about pros and cons either way. They can be, you know, not sure what they want to decide, and then meanwhile, other things can be happening in other chapters and scenes, other stuff is going on, but that one question is kind of in the back of their head, so it's going to be in the back of the reader's head as well. All of this tension has been built up over time, so that by the time they finally make a decision, we're like, please just make a decision. This isn't going to work, obviously, for every big question or offer that's being asked. It's you know, not for every situation that a character is dealing with, but for those big ones that are going to shape the course of the story or shape a big component of the character's development, having them stretch out their decision over the span of a few chapters can help build up that tension. So take a couple minutes and jot down some internal conflicts that your characters could be wrestling with. And another way of thinking of that is, what can no one else save them from? Okay, there's a bomb on the bus. Nothing creates suspense like a countdown. We know this. A countdown gives a reason for action to take place right now, and then when you have a countdown plus roadblocks that are in place, that's going to create suspense. You want to have a goal the character is reaching for. If they don't reach the goal, there's stakes, so there's some tension there. If they have all the time in the world to reach the goal, there's not a lot of tension there because what difference does it make if they act on it now versus 3 years from now? So the countdown means you have to act right now. But then you throw in roadblocks as well. You throw in, it's not just that it has to happen right now, but it has to happen right now and all of these things are in your way. That's going to build suspense. So here's some examples of countdowns that we're familiar with. All the magic is going to disappear at midnight. I hope I don't get a copyright infringement for this. The killer's on the loose and about to strike again. The killer's been killing someone every night this week, and now, the sun is going down. So there's a countdown right there. The final tournament is 2 weeks away, and your main character has barely started training. There's a countdown. Here's some other countdowns by genre, just for some examples. In sci-fi, there can be all kinds of mechanical situations that go wrong. The oxygen tank has sprung a leak and the place to fix it is too far away. In a horror story, the murders happen every full moon and tonight's a full moon. For romance, the love interest is about to get on the plane and fly out of the protagonist's life if they don't confess their feelings. And even with memoir, you can introduce a countdown. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away and I still hadn't told my family. Here's just a few more by other genres. For historical fiction, a well-known historical event is due to take place. Be something our characters obviously wouldn't know about because they haven't lived through it yet. But us as modern readers are knowing this is about to happen any given moment. For a mystery story, the crime lords are set to meet tonight to discuss their final plans. In a fantasy story, you can have that the evil king is about to be crowned, but it must be stopped so that he won't access the full powerful magic. And of course, the classic countdown, the classic ticking time bomb. The hero needs to cut the correct wires to stop the ticking time bomb, and she has 4 seconds left. Classic. So now just take a couple minutes and identify some countdowns that you can introduce for your characters. The most fun part about suspense and tension is well-timed reveals. Here is how to do that. Reveals are going to be about who knows what. Is it going to be a character-facing reveal, or a reader-facing reveal, or both? So here are some types of reveals. So we have direct observation, which is that a character and or the reader directly witnesses something happening. A disclosure reveal, which would be when one character tells another character or the reader some information, and that's how we learn. And then finally there would be a suspicion is confirmed. So the character or reader has suspected something already, and then a final piece of evidence confirms it. And that piece of evidence on its own wouldn't necessarily mean anything, but because these little hints have been given over time, that final piece kind of puts it all together. And here are some methods of reveal. You can have delayed realization. A character already knows the facts, but only connects them later. A climactic confrontation, which is when a secret is revealed in the heat of argument or an emotional moment. An accidental revelation, which is when information slips out unintentionally. A third-party interruption, which is when a new or unexpected character causes the reveal. You can have physical evidence, such as an object, a letter, a photo, some other kind of object that exposes the truth about something. You can have a flashback reveal, which is a withheld memory or a moment from the past that's shown later. That can be very similar to a delayed realization. You can have a situation, of course, where a reader and character are learning something at the same time. And then the dramatic irony is when the reader has known the truth longer than the character. The tension is finally resolved when the character figures it out. And this is one of my favorite tips for a well-timed reveal. I did not come up with this. I read it somewhere, and I'll put that in the notes down below, but I super loved it. This is one of my favorite tips for a well-timed reveal. The best tip for a reader to guess the identity of a killer is 3 paragraphs to 1 page prior to the detective figuring it out or announcing it. This, of course, doesn't have to just be a killer and detective mystery situation. It can be any kind of secret or information that the reader is going to be figuring out. That 3 paragraphs to 1 page time period is kind of for a specific reason. If it's too much longer than that the reader has figured something out, they're going to start to get annoyed with your characters for not figuring it out. They're going to be like, can you please just pay attention and look at all the information here? Why are you not able to figure this out? If it's too quick, or if it feels like it comes out of the blue, the reader's going to feel tricked a little bit, and that doesn't feel good either. You don't want to feel totally blindsided. Surprise twists are a different thing, but when it comes to something that has been hinted at throughout a story, and then finally all the pieces are being put together, you want to give that reader a little bit of the payoff that they can feel smarter than the detective or whoever it is that's figuring out the information. Okay, and here are some final tips to turn up the tension. You're always going to want to find ways to make your characters and readers uncomfy. When characters are too comfortable, they are not experiencing tension, and that means the reader is not either. We're going to look at 3 specific ways to make readers uncomfortable. We already talked about information control, but we'll touch on that again. Proximity, and then also social niceties. So information control is when you're manipulating who knows what, as we've said. When the reader knows more than the characters do, that can feel a little uncomfy, because it's like watching two pets approach a corner at the same time, and maybe they don't like each other, and all you can do is watch until they meet, and you're going to see what happens. That can feel a little suspenseful. When a character knows a secret that they aren't supposed to, so that's the friends example here, they don't know that we know, that they know, it's a whole thing. And then obviously when characters have misinformation, that can lead to tension as well. Proximity can be very stressful. Claustrophobic situations, a submarine, a space station, a bunker, road trip with someone that you're not particularly interested in being in a car with, the only one bed trope in romances, enemies who are forced to cooperate, survival scenarios, and trapped with no escape. Here's some examples in the corner of stories that do this really well. And then social niceties that can create some tension and stress for our characters and us as well. This is the sort of overly formal greetings that you'd see in Bridgerton between two characters who really don't like each other, but socially and culturally they don't have any option except to be very polite to each other. Arranged marriages and forced alliances, dinner parties where there's betrayal and secrets, dances and balls where proximity is forcing the civility to happen between characters, award ceremonies where someone's losing bitterly but they're forced to clap, family reunions with unresolved past conflicts can create a lot of tension for our characters. So just to recap, and here's some more homework for you. You want to identify what's at stake for your characters and tie those stakes to their goals. Look for opportunities to add deadlines or countdowns. Use internal conflict to create emotional volatility. Delay decisions into a separate scene from when the option is given. Try drafting a scene from a different point of view to shift the tension and also to play with what kind of information you can reveal to the reader. Play with different types of reveals. Who knows what and when. Put characters in uncomfortable situations. And consider what comforts your character, and then take it away. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found some useful tips. Let me know in the comments what your favorite ways of building suspense and tension are in your writing.